Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Oh, Miles here.
Your Owl Post for the week is freshly delivered, and I am just one of the hosts here, Matthew Rushing, and with me, as she is and has been for every single week of this journey, the one, the only, Andrea Coffman.
Man, you make us sound so old.
Well, we've been doing this for 87 years.
How many parts is our soul split into?
I know, seriously. It is great, though, because I just, like, every time I think about how far we've come, and it's so exciting that we're in chapter 15 of the very last book, and I love being in this book. I love that we're at, the final book. So, yeah, it's just super exciting.
I do too. It has been, it doesn't feel like it's been that long, but then I think about the fact that I wasn't even pregnant when we started this, and my daughter will be 3 in like 2 weeks. It's pretty phenomenal. So yeah, it has been quite a journey, but a good one, and I'm glad it's not over yet. So I feel like we're talking like it's over. It's not over yet, guys.
No, not at all.
You still got a little while with us. But yeah, I do. I really enjoy this book. This is one of my favorites. So I'm
me
glad
too.
We finally made it here.
Well, we do have a new review over there from the Apple Podcasts, and it says, "Amazing, I love HP, Harry Potter," and their name is a bunch of emojis, so Emoji will call you. They said, "This is so great, I love this podcast, and you need to make more episodes faster coming." So, we have another request for us to go faster.
For us to go faster, yeah. I almost had a Steve Carell moment there.
Yeah, must go faster. Must go faster. I can't do it. But we love that people love us. They love us so much, Drea. They want us to be going faster.
I know.
That's pretty nice.
We love you guys too.
Yeah.
We can only go so fast though.
It's true.
Bear with us.
True. Yeah, if you saw my schedule right now, it's insane. So, but we are excited. We're in chapter 15. We'll be diving into that in a second. But, of course, reminder, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, give us a review like our recent reviewer did. Help people find the show. But we're all over the place. We're on Spotify. We're now on Amazon Music, which is really cool. They have a great podcast section, so you can check that out. You can also find us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/The Nerd Party. And then, of course, we're online at thenerdparty.com, and you can see all of the shows that we're doing there. And then you can send us an email if you'd like over at the contact section. It's thenerdparty.com/contact. So, Drea, this chapter is called The Goblin's Revenge. And there are some very important things that happen in this chapter, but there's also a lot of time that passes throughout the chapter as well. And I would say this is one of the moodiest chapters that we've had since probably book 5.
It's probably like the angstiest chapter we've had since book 5, right? There have been some very emotional and a little moody, but this is... We really, she calls it out about halfway through the chapter, but we do get to see really the impact that things have on our demeanor and on our effectiveness when we don't have them. So, she calls out the fact that Ron is accustomed to having a home-cooked meal 3 times a day.
Right.
And how it sort of dramatically impacts his mood and his willingness. And he becomes kind of cranky pants and all that fun stuff. And it's, something that I think we can all relate to in the current environment, right? A lot of our coping mechanisms and things have been taken from us, especially those who are extroverts. And so, I think it's just very real that everything becomes that much harder when you have a hard time coping. So Yeah, I totally agree. This is a very angsty chapter, and it's one where you just don't like Ron. We've had such a couple of really good redeeming chapters for Ron, and then this one you're just like, man, can you stop whining so much? It's one of those. It's also one where we feel kind of aimless for the most part, which is hard. It's a hard one to get through.
Well, and it is difficult because, and I think this is one of those chapters where we won't necessarily talk about everything in chronological order. So, a lot of the struggles here is that kind of aimlessness that they are all feeling because, one, they don't know where the rest of the Horcruxes are.
Or even what the rest of the Horcruxes are, right? Like they don't have any. There's no like guide to hunting Horcruxes.
Yeah. Apparently, there's no Dummy's Guide to Horcruxes for people, right? Right. And so, one of the things that they do is that they discuss where they think they can be. The only place they can kind of really think of that they can get to, they go to London to the orphanage that Voldemort was at, and of course, they don't find a Horcrux there, and Harry never really thought there would be one because Voldemort hated that place. He also kind of shoots down the idea that there's one at Borgin and Burke's because, he always was trying to transcend where he started, and so that wouldn't be grand enough for him, Harry doesn't think. And
he figured it would be too easily found. Well, right? It's too not off the beaten path enough, considering you found the locket originally in a cave in the middle of nowhere. That's isolated within Fairy, so not quite in the same vein as the others.
Yeah.
So,
well, and this is another thing too that that's adding to all of this as well. Like you mentioned, Ron kind of being really testy, is that what we're seeing here is that this is the first time Ron's truly been tested in the way of, like, not having enough food, and not having the comforts of home and or Hogwarts, and this is something to which, Hermione has been able to acclimate more readily to, and Harry spent his whole life training for this. Like, it's like those kids that were homeschooled, and they're like, I've been training for COVID my whole life, Harry was mistreated as a kid, didn't get enough to eat, so he's used to this lifestyle. Yes, his life has been different now that he had been at Hogwarts, but it's not something strange for him to have to go back to, whereas Ron is really struggling with this idea that they don't have that much food, and they don't have the most comfortable place to stay. The one thing that, is funny, because, we see the tent in the movie, for the fourth movie, and the Goblet of Fire, and it looks much nicer. And then they supposedly have the same tent in this movie, and it doesn't look that nice. And yes, it might have smelled like cats, which she mentioned in the last one, but the tent is nice. It's basically like a small flat with couches and like comfy chairs, and it's not the worst place in the world. Ron's just not accustomed to not being basically at home or at Hogwarts, and so that is really one of the. This is the struggle. They don't really have a direction right now, and they're struggling just to make it every day with what they're going to eat, where they're going to go. They're not staying in one place more than like 12 hours, and they're all passing around the locket to wear, which is making things worse.
Yeah, I was going to say, all of that, and you have this sort of dark dread and kind of nastiness that comes along with wearing this locket, which we learn, impacts Harry's ability to cast a Patronus the first time he tries to venture out to find food. He just can't bring himself to cast it, and it turns out it's because he's wearing the locket, and he just can't muster enough sort of positive thinking through that, which tells you a lot, considering that's something that Harry is very proficient at. And so, that doesn't help either, right? And, I always thought that her Horcrux and the impact that it has on each of these people was the most literal translation of depression that she writes about in these novels, because it literally hangs around their necks and makes them irritable and unpleasant, and which is such an unassumed side effect of depression, where nobody wants to do anything. You're sad and things like that. But we forget that a lot of times with that comes irritability and the inability to have the energy to play nice with other people and give people the benefit of the doubt. Like, there's so much that goes into this. And I always thought of them wearing the locket was like them carrying that burden of depression. And so to see it play out so kind of transparently in this chapter, very night and day like, shows how it can really be a challenge to deal with that in your real life, and how it's so hard to describe the feeling to somebody else who's never been through it, because it's literally like wearing a Horcrux around your neck. Yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, we do see it play out in all of them. With Harry, it is this feeling of not being able to overcome and create any good feelings. For Hermione, I think it makes her ultra snippy. And
it makes her lose confidence in herself and her abilities, right? Like, she loses, her light becomes a little more dim.
Yeah, and for Ron, it is the accentuation of the depression he's feeling with being away from his family and being away from the comfortable life. Yes, this is what's so interesting, because the Weasleys are the family that, they don't have a lot, but they have had a very comfortable, I would say, very middle class life, right? So, and it's been lower middle class, but they've still always had food, and they've still always had a comfortable house, and they've still all been taken care of and loved, and they're not in that place anymore. And it's very difficult for Ron to deal with. And I think, too, he's dealing with the fact that he's away from his family for an extended period of time. And that's never happened before, because he's always had family even in school with him, Like, him and his brothers may have issues and everything, but again, there's still always been that there. So I think that's really hitting him hard. One of the things, though, I wanted to mention before I totally forget, since we're not quite doing this chronologically, I love the moment that after the last chapter, Harry wakes up in the morning and he goes and he buries Mad-Eye Moody's eye and gives him a final resting place, because that's the only piece of him that they've found. And I love that he marks the tree where he buries him under with a cross, which is our first inclination, and I'll make this case a lot later in the book, but of where she's going to go with this story and some of the things that J.K. Rowling holds quite dear, I think.
I think there's a lot that happens early in the book that are small steps, and to that point, I kind of do like, though, when Ron does have his moment here where he agrees to move on quickly as long as it's within proximity of a bacon sandwich. And
who doesn't like a bacon sandwich?
I would second that, right?
Yes.
I'll second that. I want a bacon sandwich. Yeah, I mean, it's nice. And I think the moment where he buries Mad-Eye Moody's eye too, it reminds you that Harry thinks about things other than himself, right? Because he's not I don't want to carry this around or anything. He thinks he would much rather be buried in the middle of nowhere where no one knows where he is than in Umbridge's door. And I think that's, we talk a lot about Harry thinking of others, and this is just another instance where he really is concerned about someone else's well-being and not really caring about his own. So, it's a sad kind of moment, but it's nice that it kind of feels like Mad-Eye gets closure.
Right. Well, and it's interesting too, because, as they're moving around, weeks are slipping by, it's getting more frustrating for them. And as the chapter progresses to a really important moment, they're in a huge argument. And part of that has been that, Harry's feeling the pressure that they're having conversations without him, and he's feeling this pressure like he needs to basically perform. They are in this huge fight about the food not being very good, and Ron's being a jerk again. I absolutely love that we get this is where I literally love the Fantastic Beasts series, when we see them cook the meal, and it takes skill to be able to charm the ingredients to make something delicious. It's not just obviously people like Molly Weasley, or we saw in the Fantastic Beasts series where the sisters are making dinner. This is a skill that you have to be able to learn, and Hermione, this is not her skill, which makes sense. Cooking is not everybody's skill. And Ron's pissed because, he thought Hermione was the one who was the best at magic, and so they're having this whole fight, and my favorite thing is Harry just being like, shut up, and they all just kind of look at him, and he's like, Hermione, be quiet, I can hear somebody.
Yeah, and before we get to that, there were two parts of that fight that I really enjoyed, in addition to what you've already shared. So the first one, I love that Hermione calls them out as Ron, she says, Ron, you always think that I should cook. And I'm starting to think it's because I'm the girl. And he corrects her and says, no, it's just because you're the best at magic. And I would assume that, you would be good at cooking because you're good at magic. But I appreciate her taking that moment to call it out and say, hey, I mean, if you're so good, maybe you should do it, right? And I was feeling a little bit like that because every time we got food, Hermione was the one cooking it. And it did feel a little sexist. So I appreciated the explanation as to why she was having Hermione cook. So I liked that. And I also really enjoyed her, because this is one that I remembered. It stuck with me reading this book all the way back to the first book. And I think I said something in the first or the second book about this. And I was like, I don't remember where I got this from, but I know it's a real thing, that you can't create food from nothing.
Right.
It's one of these magical laws and the basis of Earth. Right. It's like our basic laws of evolution or gravity. It's up there with that, right? In the wizarding world, that you have to know where it is. You have to manipulate it. You can do all kinds of stuff to it, but you can't create it from nothing. And I like that. And I appreciate that because, again, it makes it a little more real and a little more relatable, right? Because we can't just summon something for nothing.
Right.
And I do like that gets called out here. Because like I said, it stuck with me. And I remember saying something in one of our really early episodes about it resonating with me already. And I had completely forgotten. It was all the way halfway through the final book that comes back. But, yeah, I mean, I also appreciated that call out, before we kind of lead into what really is the meat of this chapter. Cause everything else is just groundwork, essentially. It's not pointless. Trust us. It's not totally pointless, but it is definitely groundwork and not as interesting as what we're getting to in the chapter.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And so what they hear is a group that's outside where they're encamped. And of course, they have their magical spells and everything that they've put around their camp.
And charms and yeah.
So they can't be seen, but they're able to hear. And what they hear is there seems to be a couple of goblins, and Ted Tonks is there. And then there's this guy named Dirk. And I think we've met him before, but I can't remember his last name because it's never mentioned. We've also got Dean Thomas, who's on the run because, his parents, his dad, left when he was a kid, and he doesn't know whether he was a muggle or not. And so you get all of these people on the run that have kind of met together, and they're all beside this brook, and they're going to catch dinner, and they're making it, and they're talking. And one of the things we really learn here that I found is really interesting is that we get some insight into goblins. And one of the reasons that Griphook and his friend have left is that Gringotts is not under the control solely anymore of the goblins, that wizards have taken that over. So not only does Voldemort have now control of the ministry, but he has control of the money too. And so for that reason, Griphook, he's not going to be beholden to anyone. And so, no, he's left. And really, too, he doesn't take sides in Wizarding Wars, and so that's one of the reasons that they're out here. This is a Wizards War, and they don't want anything to do with it. When the dust settles, they'll come back and hopefully be back at their job. So I thought that was really interesting, and what we learn is that they have some interesting news that Severus Snape would probably love to know what they knew about, a very famous sword that Harry was supposed to get in a will.
So what's interesting about this group is we've got 2 goblins who have abandoned ship from Gringotts for sort of personal patriotic reasons, if you will, right? They don't serve a wizarding master, so they'll go on the run so they're not killed, but honestly, they could care less about either side. You have Dirk and his Cresswell, and it's the Dirk Cresswell who we heard a couple chapters ago when Arthur Weasley threatened Harry.
There you go.
As a transfigured.
We knew the last name somewhere.
Yep, and he threatened him and said, he had sort of faked or researched his family tree or something like that. So apparently he never made it to Azkaban. He actually was 10 times the wizard that the Death Eaters are, because he, shirked Yaxley, I think is who he threw down with and escaped from.
He says he was able to stun Dawlish, but the interesting thing is he thinks that he was maybe under the Imperious Curse, and that's why it was so easy. So we get a little picture of like what's going on behind the scenes here with the people at the Ministry. So
yep. So that's interesting. We find out another one of the wizards is Ted Tonks, who's kind of facilitating and narrating the conversation a little bit. And the last person we find out is Dean Thomas from Gryffindor. And we find out it's because, his mom is fine. His mom is fine because she's a pureblood, but they don't know who his dad is. Or he doesn't know who his dad is. And so he left to save himself, because at this point, even one parent being a pureblood isn't enough. And so, we have like this sort of motley crew of people talking in the forest from all different walks of life. And it is so interesting that, and they also discuss whether Harry is real, and they talk about a couple other things. But yeah, they talk about the fact that the sword of Gryffindor was attempted to be stolen from Snape's office by that Weasley girl, which we know there's only one Weasley girl in that family, so it's Ginny. And they tried to sneak the sword out of Snape's office and got caught. Apparently they're okay, thankfully we hear. But as part of this conversation, Griphook is so amused with himself because his sort of last parting act, which is sort of the title of this chapter, is that he recognized the sword that was placed in a vault at Gringotts after that incident is actually not the sword of Gryffindor, but a fake, because they can identify goblin-made items sort of instantly, which we know because of the tiara from the wedding. They recognize that as goblin-made and not wizard-made, not wizard-made. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of big. I mean, that's big. And then we'll go on to learn even more about the sword that makes it even bigger and answers a big question and makes us feel warm and fuzzy inside. At least it made me feel warm and fuzzy.
I think it's really fascinating that we learn all this about the sword. We also learn, Griphook says that the kids who tried to steal the sword were punished. And
cruelly. He had to add an adjective on there, because why not?
And one of the interesting things, too, is that, like you said, when they're talking about, if Harry is the real deal, if he's really the chosen one, we hear that the Quibbler has become the paper of choice for people who want the real news, which you never thought you'd hear that before.
I like, too, that he calls out, like, there has not been one reference to some reference to a magical creature that was one of those ridiculous things. That there hasn't been one ridiculous reference in the last issue. And that they don't know how much longer, Lovegood will be able to produce this paper, but
Right.
until he doesn't anymore, it's the most reliable source of information in sort of the wizarding world right now. Because, the other thing I thought was really interesting, they call it out and they don't really get into too much detail about it, but I sort of wish they had. It was kind of when we went back to talking about Harry and Dean says, I know Harry, I know him personally. I believe all of the stuff about him being the chosen one, and I believe that he's doing the right thing. And, he's sort of like this true believer of Harry, right? Which has to make Harry feel good. But it also goes, I think it's Dirk maybe who throws out there, well, like, how do we know, and Ted makes an acknowledgement of his ability to evade capture so far and how impressive that is and how that's not easy to do. And Dirk says something like, how do we know he hasn't been captured and killed already? And we just weren't told. And that's when they get into like the Quibbler versus the Daily Prophet breakdown. But I kind of wish they talked a little bit more about that, because that's the most preposterous thing I've ever heard. Like, the Daily Prophet would want that known from the rooftops. They would hang the body from his heels like Mussolini.
Right.
Like, this would be the biggest news ever if that actually happened. And so I find it interesting that was never called out as just the most ridiculous thing, because to me, there wasn't even like a scoff of ridiculousness. They kind of moved past it and used it to talk about something else. But I was sort of like, that's dumb. That's dumb, was like my reaction to that sentence. Like, I sort of wish I was around that campfire eating that salmon, so I could be like, that's dumb. Don't be dumb.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in calling that out, because it does feel dumb that they wouldn't have
There's
thought
no better
of that.
word for it.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, too, because as they kind of move on, because they're going to make their camp elsewhere, Hermione has a brilliant idea. She pulls out the portrait of Professor Black, and she also, which is really cool, she blindfolds him so he can't see where they are, and they ask about the sword and what happened to it. He mentions that not only was Ginny involved, but so was Neville Longbottom and Luna Lovegood, and they find out that their which I love, their punishment was actually just going to the Forbidden Forest with Hagrid, so big sigh of relief there. But he makes fun of them because they ask questions, and he makes fun of Hermione and Harry because of their Muggle-born status, and they don't know these things as much as somebody who was born in the Wizarding world would. But, she asked, had it been taken out to be cleaned or anything? We learned that Goblin made things silver. It repels any dirt, anything like that, and it only imbibes what strengthens it. And we also learn that the only time that people can hop portraits is when they're in the same building. So like at Hogwarts, all of the portraits can hop each other's portrait and visit, but you can't visit somebody else's portrait in a different location. Like Dumbledore cannot come and talk to them through this portrait. And so
right, so Dumbledore could visit Nigelus in his portrait in Hogwarts, but he can't then go from his portrait in Hogwarts to his portrait in the beaded bag.
Mm-hmm.
He can only go local. He can't. He can travel if they're in the same place. They can't travel between the same portraits.
Right.
So you'd have to have Dumbledore's opposing portrait in order to have Dumbledore come to you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we learn biggest of biggest news. The last time that he had seen the sword removed is when Professor Dumbledore used it to break open the ring, the Horcrux ring.
As he framed it, some ring.
Yes. What we know, it's
what
the
we
Horcrux
know is
ring.
the ring.
Yes.
Yeah. Not to be confused with the one true ring, but the ring.
Well, not the one ring to rule them all. No, that's a different ring. So
different ring, but of equal importance.
Exactly. So we
We're
learn
mixing our nerd analogies here, man.
Yeah. all of them coming together. We learn how important this is, and Hermione and Harry just start going back and forth about, oh, this is why Dumbledore wanted you to have the sword, and we need to find the sword now because we know, the reason it can do that is because, well, it's got basilisk venom in it. It's imbibed that, and that's why it can destroy the Horcrux. And they just look at Ron, who just like is snorting at them. And they're like, oh, yeah, like, remembered I'm here, huh? And he just kind of goes off on them because he's upset about this idea that they have to find one more thing that they don't know where it is. And he just kind of goes off on Harry, too, about how he thought that he knew stuff. And he, like, why don't you know anything? And, I thought Dumbledore would have told you more. And Harry's like, look, I've been completely honest with you the whole time. I've told you everything that I know and everything I've been told. And it really hurts Harry that Ron is coming at him like this because, Harry has done everything he can to be as honest as possible, even not hiding from them when, he's been having these flashes with Voldemort. And so Ron
says that these are the things he's upset about, right? But from the outside in, not being a member of this argument, we can actually see that it's so much more than, we've talked a little bit about already why Ron's snippety and he misses his family and things like that. But, he's also been very insecure about being Harry Potter's best friend, right? Like, this has been a role he's had to play. And Harry has done a good job of not making him feel like a second fiddle, but with everything else, sort of with all the other weights of the world on his shoulders, as you will, as I air quote, as if everybody can see me. It's sort of like he runs out of, it's very true. Like we talked about a little while ago about with depression, he very much so had no more energy to deal with fighting off those thoughts. And that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back, was his connection with Hermione, and their sort of spitballing back and forth was just, it was too much. He didn't feel valuable. He didn't feel like, what was his role here? What was his purpose? He's miserable. They don't seem to care about him. Again, air quotes. There's so much more going on here than all of that. And, he uses that as an excuse. I want to go home and see my family. It doesn't matter. You guys don't care. You don't know what you're doing. He's going to hurt them to push them away so he can leave. And then he does just that.
Well, and he even throws in like, oh, your parents are fine. And Harry's like, my parents are dead. Like, how dare you? And so,
right.
Like, I think one of the things here is that Ron says a lot of things you can't just easily take back to both of them.
I feel like that's super relatable. A lot of times we can relate to saying something really hurtful to those we care about because we know how to do that. We know how to hurt them. We know them the best, right? So when we're angry, it's so much easier for us to say that thing that we can't ever take back and changes everything forever. And so, or do that thing that changes everything forever, right? We don't always think about it and what we're saying or what we're doing and what it's going to do. And I think that's where Ron just stops holding back.
Well, and it's so interesting because as Ron's leaving, he looks at Hermione basically to come with him, and she's like, I'm staying. We promised to help Harry. And there's another knife that gets driven in when he's like, oh, I see. I get it. You choose him. And, like, it's the first time that Ron has kind of made this a thing where it's like, oh, you're choosing Harry romantically, basically. And it's never been true, right? Like, this has never been a thing between them. And Ron has made it this kind of, again, everything that Ron really does here is just so nasty. And it's going to be interesting to see how they can recover from that because he's gone. Hermione runs after him. By the time she gets out there, he's already disapparated. And the only thing left to do is she curls up in a ball in the chair and cries, and Harry puts some covers over him and goes to bed. Like, there's nothing left to do. It's just such a devastatingly depressing way to end the chapter.
Yeah, especially it's going to be interesting to see as we start the next chapter and the rest of this book. We've talked so much about how the three of them are stronger together, and they each come with their own set of strengths and their own, skills, and maybe living in the forest with no food and no family is not Ron's strength, but it's going to be interesting to see if the power of three is needed, or if, are they stronger without him now, or are they weaker without him? I think it's going to be interesting to see how the dynamic plays out, especially considering we know that Hermione has a tendency to snap to the extreme as well and get really kind of cold, and overly motherly, if you will, in a way that is not nurturing. So I think we're in for a treat, if you will, or not a treat. I don't think it's going to be a treat.
No. Well, and it's interesting because, in the Bible, in Ecclesiastes, it says a strand of three cords is not easily broken. And what you see here is that cord has been broken now. It's been unraveled, and now there's only two. And yes, two is better than one, right? But it's not the same as the three that they had.
It's not as strong as three,
no,
right?
Absolutely.
Same as you think about a triangle and how much harder it is to break a triangle and how much stronger that is. And, a table with two legs doesn't stand up, and I would be so much better balanced if I had a third leg. I would have not broken so many bones. It'd be so klutzy. I think there's power in threes. We talk about, we list things in threes. You naturally give three suggestions. So I think I don't think we're going to be in for a treat for a chapter or two. It doesn't mean there's not going to be really exciting progression that comes of it, but I think we're definitely worser for the wear, regardless of which of the three we lost. But losing someone from the Trinity is tough, right?
Yeah, it is going to be rough. So, I'm excited to get to the next chapter, which is called Godric's Hollow. But before we do that, where can everybody find you, Drea?
You can find me on Twitter at PCFChick or on Instagram at Andrea Coffman, and it's Coffman.
And I am on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Pharaoh under the name MattRushing02. You can also follow me over at the 602 Club, which is for the podcast I do over on TFM, which is for all things geeky, a general show, a geek show there. And of course, doing that podcast over on TFM, the 602 Club, as well as Literary Treks and The Orb, both with Chris Jones. Literary Treks is about the books and the comics of Star Trek, and The Orb is about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And then here on this network, doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills. Every week we are talking about a different topic there in the Star Wars universe. And in fact, right now, as we await The Mandalorian Season 2, we are doing a commentary series for every single episode. So that's been a lot of fun. But thank you so much for checking your Owl Post.
Mischief managed.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.